going on, everybody? Excited for another episode of Volnay Live. We have an awesome guest tonight. We have Erich Zachrison. He is the owner of Contacts, an architect we've been working with for probably about 5 years now. He's the principal of the firm, so it's going to be a great opportunity for you guys to ask questions to someone who's very involved in not only our projects, but projects with a lot of other developers around the city. He'll be able to give you some great insight on things you should look for on projects, things you should look for on renovations. Overall, just, all aspects of architecture. So excited to hear his story, and then he can kind of run you through what his business is like today and then how you guys can work with him. So he should be joining in shortly. Throughout the interview, use the comments or the questions option on Instagram, and we will try to get to every single question. I know we've got a bunch of questions that came in before that I have ready for Erich, but we'll answer as many questions as we can throughout the entire interview.
Oh, hey.
There he is. What's up, bud?
How's it going?
How's it going?
Super.
Thanks for joining us. So we've got a couple people in here. We'll give it another minute for people to join in. How's everything going?
Great. It's great now that I've figured out the technology, but isn't that how we start every call or every interaction these days?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like it's been crazy watching things transition from in-person to all via Zoom and all that. Do you think that we're going to see this continue forward with meetings? How do you think that's going to work?
I think there'll be a point in time when nobody will have any Zoom calls because they'll be so sick of them, and they'd rather just not have contact pretty soon.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got a bunch of people on here. So everybody's Erich Zachrison, partner, founder, owner of Contacts. Extremely excited. We've been working together, I think now for about 3 or 4 years from our first conversation.
Yeah, something like that. It seems
something like that. So guys, throughout the entire interview, keep sending in questions. You can either use the comments or you can use the questions option on Instagram, and we'll get to those at the end. But first thing first, kind of tell us about your story. How did you end up founding Contacts, and kind of run us through your journey?
Sure. I'll start. I grew up in a farm in North Dakota, wanting nothing more than to get out of North Dakota and to be an architect. And went to school in Chicago, got a job right out of IIT. I got a job at SOM, which is just an incredible place to work, a great place to cut your teeth. They knew technically, they had design down. It was so fantastic that I kept telling myself I was going to move on and try other things, and ended up being there for about 12 years of amazing projects. And then I got to a point where I was at a management level and moving up through the firm pretty quickly, and decided that I needed to study business in order to better run that company. But while I was in business school, I kind of got addicted to entrepreneurship classes, to the disruptive economy, and thinking about how I might want to structure my own firm if I didn't have the baggage of a really successful firm that was moving, at its own pace. And so out of there, I got a job managing a planning firm in India. Worked there for about a year, and then that company got absorbed by a big company back in Chicago, and worked there for a couple of years. Started strategizing how I would start my own company, because that was kind of just enough to whet my appetite to get to formulate certain things, but not have enough of a separation from the older ways of doing things. And so when my fiance at the time, or soon to be my fiance, decided that she couldn't work in Chicago coming out of her fellowship, we looked around and we moved, and we did that Venn diagram thing that young couples have to do and figure out what cities work. And Boston was really high up on the list. And so we moved here. I started Contacts about 3 years later with a partner. We were doing legacy projects. We did a church in Chicago. We did a high-rise building in Miami. It was fantastic, like to have that to get us going, because it takes a while in Boston to get people to trust you in order to do projects here. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, about almost 2 years before we had a Boston project, and then a lot of those were developer projects, fairly small at first, but it was great because it gave me an opportunity to kind of set up the firm and an opportunity to learn the zoning and planning here, the specific here, the way that people approach projects here, all of that kind of. I worked with a couple of clients really closely for a while, and then um, about 2 years ago, those clients started just recommending me out, and all of a sudden, I had to hire people and had to start dealing with a lot more different types of projects and different types of clients, because I'd learned to serve those 3 or 4 people really well, but now I have like the challenge of getting to work with a bunch of different kinds of approaches, and there are different solutions to different problems, different ways that different people want to approach it. So yeah, so now we have an office and a WeWork over here at North Station. There are 7 of us, and we're approaching just a broader and broader range of projects for our clients as they kind of like draw us into bigger and different kinds of problems.
Nice. So yeah, so let's talk about the current business and how you're structured. How big is the team? What type of projects are you taking on? Can someone hire you guys for a quick renovation, a deck, or is it only larger projects? Because I think that's also a battle people, you get into. It's like you start getting traction, and then people don't want to hire you for the smaller stuff because they think it's too small. So how's
Yeah,
Context set up right now?
yeah, that's exactly true. I think that even when I started the firm, I had only done high-rise buildings. I had only done some fairly complex. The smallest project was probably a 500,000 square feet, or maybe a little less. But then I think even I started this thinking that I would do these projects until I had a team that could approach bigger projects. But we really love the smaller things. I mean, small is kind of not the right term because they're big to somebody, but I we do probably a roof deck project every couple of weeks. We do some smaller scale renovations that take very very little of our time, a smaller amount of our resources, but they're incredibly rewarding. They're really great to like get to work on someone's home with them. They get very excited about it. We get very excited about being able to bring kind of our diverse range of experiences and the things we've brought to homeowners who might not have thought of certain things. But we've also, and I like to think that we're going to do that forever, but we've diversified into some bigger projects because I'd like to have that kind of resiliency for the firm, but also I think that it teaches you to look at things in a couple of different ways. The rigorous efficiency that you need for a big project, if you can apply that to a 3-unit building and still have 85-90% efficiency, that's really appreciated at both scales. So I think we're going to continue to branch out as long as the things that we do can support or enhance the skill sets that we're already doing.
And so, how are you building your business now? Are you guys doing any marketing? Is it all through word of mouth? How is that working? And are you continuing to see business come in with COVID? How's that working?
Yeah, I was just saying to one of my contractor buddies that about 2 years ago, I made a concerted effort to develop a little bit of advertising, some slogan, and a little bit of marketing materials, and I never got to use them. They're still sitting on a shelf somewhere. It's all been my incredible clients just reaching out and recommending me, and I get calls just kind of out of the blue on a regular basis. We sometimes joke that we're really careful about not broadcasting sometimes that we're architects because we don't want to get too many projects going on at any time, but it's been great. COVID saw a little bit of a slowdown, but strangely, as far as I could tell, we only had one project stop, and that was a homeowner who just wanted to kind of take things a little bit more slowly, or stop it altogether. But we're still starting a handful of new projects each week. It's been challenging working from home, challenging seeing people scared and not being able to have like the neighborhood meetings and some of the inputs that we get from our uh, coworkers. But we haven't seen work drop off that much.
Nice. So let's get into, I think a lot of the people that follow this and watch this are people that are newbies that are trying to get into or had done one or two projects. So let's kind of talk about the two different style projects. Let's talk about a long form. Someone hires you, they want to do 3 condos out of a triple decker.
Mm-hmm.
How does that process work from the initial phone call? And how does that relationship work? And then followed by that, we'll get into a development project, kind of how that relationship goes.
You're talking about like a renovation of an existing building into 3 condos.
Yeah.
I typically call our bread and butter projects. Those can be really quick. The client will call us up, give us a little description of what the project is, depending on their level of comfort. Some of them just will just text us an address and a time to go, and we'll go out there. We'll spend a couple hours on site measuring and getting a good feel for the building as it stands today, and then turn around a set of proposal drawings. Some clients want to sketch out the whole thing and like lay out what their ideas are. Some will just tell us what their goals are for the project, and some will just say, what can you do with it? And so in any scenario, we're kind of comfortable to do that and come back with a set of plans and some strategies for how to make the most out of the existing project. And we love like the renovation. There's so many green aspects to keeping and reusing some of the great building stock that exists here. And then we'll, depending on whether or not there were additions or things that went through zoning, we'll put together a permit set and support them through the proposal, the neighborhood process, the BBDA process, and getting the building permit. Or if there's no variances, which there is like maybe 20% of our projects don't have variances, they go even quicker. We get together the permit set, we work with a structural engineer and fire protection and get those things together for them, and then it's off to the races.
Yeah. So you mentioned working with the engineers, and I think that's something that you guys do a great job on. And I think smaller firms sometimes struggle with the idea of their responsibility is more than just drafting of a set of their architectural drawings. Like an architect is actually, if you think about a project, they're really the spearhead, right? Yes, the developer's putting the cash up, but in the end, the architect's the one that designed it, put everything together, and is actually the person who sits between all the GC, the engineers, and that's kind of the role. And I think a lot of times small shops fail to embrace that role. They say, hey, here's my plans, go ahead. And you guys, you do a good job of staying involved and managing that within a budget. And how do you guys do that? And what should people expect from their architect?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think something that I've always taken as a point of pride when you meet somebody in the building trades and you tell them you're an architect, a lot of times for very good reasons, they'll roll their eyes and say, okay, he's that guy who did one kind of clueless set of drawings and then walked away from the project and came back later on to complain about how people, didn't do it right. But I had the fortunate situation where my first project, I worked on the GM headquarters in Detroit for 5 years. And I was working on the site with contractors for most of that time. And coordinating engineers and coordinating like responses to real life problems, either in the design phase or in the execution and construction. And so like, it's always been to me really interesting that we, as the classic architecture term was like the master builder, is the person who can pull together these pieces, even if you don't know them, know how to figure out how to get the right people to answer those things and put them together in a kind of conform packet. And so we've, in a small shop, like I worked at SOM, you had all the engineers sitting down the hall from you, and they were part of the same firm. Here, right off the bat, I wanted to figure out how to do some kind of situation like that. So we've got a couple structural engineers in particular, but MEP engineers too, that we would like to we'd like to work really closely with. In fact, for expediency, in some cases, we do the drafting for the engineers. And I like to do that because some of our team are right out of school, and this is a great opportunity for them to, by drafting it and by understanding what's on those drawings, they're able to anticipate those things even when they're just doing diagrams at the beginning of the project. So it's something that kind of I got beat into me the first couple of years that I was working.
Yeah, no, I think you hit some great points. I think when you're hiring an architect, and this is something that, I've learned over the years, right, is you need to have that conversation off the bat of how that relationship is going to be, right? So set the expectations, whether you're hiring Context or any architecture firm, is what is their involvement going to be and what the expectation of involvement is going to be, from the drafting to the conversation with engineers. Who's going to be on point? Is it going to be the developer or the newbie with the engineers, or is it going to be the architect on point? Are you going to be able to step back, and who's going to run that relationship? And then also, once you get past the permit being issued, is there an expectation that the architect will be on call and available to answer questions? Because a lot of times, once that permit's issued, it's kind of like, hey, I did my part. And you want to make sure that you've drafted in your contract how that relationship's going to be set up. So, anyone who's hiring an architect, you should, on a project, if it's something simple like a deck, there might not be that level of conversation, but on like a development project or a gut renovation, make sure you clearly draw out the relationship and how that's going to be structured and how the fees are going to be structured to make sure everyone understands how that's going to be. So now let's switch over kind of to the development side. Obviously, that's a lot of the stuff you do. Let's kind of talk about the relationship when it's a developer, experienced, newbie, whatever, calls up Context and says, I have a site under agreement, or I purchased a site, I want to do a project. A lot of people listened into the Rich Lynn's interview, which might, get into some of the same stuff, but how does that conversation go when they call you?
I second everything Rich does. He and I have done a ton of projects together. So I like to be called up even before clients purchase a piece of property. I'm really proud that a half a dozen times I've been able to steer clients away from projects, or in most cases be able to support what they expect to get from the project. But they'll call us up or text us an address, and I'll spend, depending on the kind of configuration of the site and the goals. Sometimes the client will call me up and say, can I get 3 units on this property, or can I get 30 units on this property? And sometimes they'll say, what can I do with this property? And then in either case, I like to just sit down, kind of really zone into what is feasible, both from a code and zoning standpoint, what might be acceptable or what might be kind of a more optimal use of the property, and lay out what the steps are going to be if the client wants to go with something that's more aggressive than what's allowed by the letter of the zoning code. And then also really think about the context of the neighborhood and what makes sense for what's going on there, both from kind of what the market is, and I'm not an expert on that, but like to ask the client the questions about what it is that they're trying to achieve with the project. And then we do a quick sketch or a couple of reports, or just sometimes it's just a quick call to explain what it is we see as the opportunity or the drawbacks to a specific site.
Yeah, so I think that, if I kind of run through the way I look at a deal lately, and a lot of times we have more, having done so many, we have a good idea of more, knowledge on stuff. But typical deal, what someone should do, call up Eric or an architect and ask for a yield study. That's kind of an idea of what could fit, based on the area. And then you can take that yield study and go to an attorney, because an attorney is not going to understand the site. right? The attorney understands what's been going on in the area as a zoning attorney, or what the zoning allows and all that stuff, but they're not going to know from a yield perspective. So first conversation with an architect about yield, second conversation to an attorney to give you more insight on what that yield and how it can, work out. How about, I got a good call today. Someone called me and said, hey, how big a building can I build on 5,900 square feet? I said, I go, well, where is it? And they go, oh, we don't have an address yet. Nice. They didn't have an address. Nice. It could have been anywhere.
Right.
I don't know.
And for all you know, it's 1 foot wide by 59,000 feet long.
It could be it's 5,900 square feet. But you don't know where it is yet. I cannot help you with any type of zoning analysis.
Right.
So let's kind of talk through things you've learned over your past year, the years of working through zoning and neighborhood meetings and client relations. What are things that people should look out for? What makes a good project? What makes a good relationship on these things? So what are things that you've learned over the years?
So as far as the relationship with the client goes, I think I've learned or kind of been reinforced a lot in the idea that we have to be in sync as much as possible throughout the process. And so like from that initial conversation, I don't ever like to go more than, a few hours or a day or two without telling the client what it is that we're kind of developing. And then and I encourage the clients to be that open, or to be as open as possible with the neighbors and any of their partners as they start to develop the project also. I think that being out of communication is a way of getting on the wrong path. And I think that one of the keys to doing this efficiently is, and you see this all the time, is sending you a half-drawn piece of something and going in there, instead of like me spending the time to develop an argument to convince a client of something, go to him and be prepared to be convinced of something else. Go to him with questions. Go to the neighbors with an idea, but not resolved into a box where you can't get yourself out of it. Be ready to be flexible and go with the flow of the project. I think that's been one of the biggest questions. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, no, it does. I think we've learned over the years is that it's not even worth trying to go through too far into the weeds early on, right? Yeah. You almost need to do like just a rough idea, yield study, and then let the process take the plans. And like, I think the back in the day mentality was like, there wasn't as much involvement. You could get things through without people realizing. Nowadays, it's all exposed. Everything's exposed. And so some people think I'm crazy that I put stuff on social media. And like, in my opinion, it doesn't matter anymore. Everyone's going to hear about it anyway. And if I'm proud of what we're creating and I'm going to stand behind it anyway, then it doesn't matter whether I'm sharing it on social media.
That's exactly it. One of my clients was, I shared with him a set of drawings. And he's like, what about copyright? And I said, it's all got to be public. You can't hide this stuff. And if your only plan to get through it is to hide it from everybody, then you're never gonna make everybody as happy as they could be if you involve them, if you have that conversation. So I agree.
Yeah, and I think with the neighborhood process and everything lately is all you can try to do. Some people who watch this might say that, oh, we don't do that, and that we're, Ricky's a scumbag developer. All we can do is try to put a project forward that we think is the best project for the site. And like, I honestly do feel that we propose projects that are the best project for the site.
And absolutely, we deal with a lot of baggage that exists in the industry from others who kind of maybe thought they were going to get away with something, or were able to like not have that conversation. And so we have to maybe be extra out there and extra willing to spend some time listening and really trying to react to the concerns of the zoning board and of the BPDA and of the neighbors. Yeah.
So one thing that we've seen over the years, and you and I have done it, but it's, the idea of proposing something that's way too big in the hopes of ending at something small. What's the thought on it? We've tried it. It's backfired.
Yeah.
But it also has worked out in some cases where, I've had projects where I proposed something that I actually might have thought was maybe pushing the line, and it got supported. And I was like, wow, I'm surprised that got supported. So, I think there is a line of like proposing a good project versus proposing something that's not in proportion. And how do you handle that? Or is it something you can control, or is it something that the developer decides?
Yeah, it's not something I have a ton of control over, but there are a few times when I've had to pull a client aside and say, look, 14 units is too many for this project, or five stories is just going to always look too big on this street. And the client will ultimately make the decisions, but you're not doing them any benefit by saying yes to everything. I've had a few projects where you have to say, look, that unit is just too small to really be marketable. You're going to be blaming me for it later. And sometimes they push for it and go ahead, and sometimes I'm able to convince them that something might be too dense or the wrong color. But you have to be honest. You have to be forthright when you have something that you see as a big red flag, and sometimes some clients will still go forward, but you have to be always try and be obvious, or try and be honest about it.
Yeah, so we're going to get back to that point that you just said regarding design and efficiency and stuff. But what right now is your biggest fear with clients with the ZBA, the neighborhood groups, COVID, things that you're seeing? So what are things that the biggest fear you have right now?
Well, I have a feeling, and you see it in actually different neighborhood groups. There's a kind of cyclical feeling of certain neighborhoods like investment, and then after a while they might feel like they've had enough investment, or they've had enough construction, or they're starting to feel taken advantage of. And so I want to try and encourage my clients to be really really open with the neighborhoods, especially those where there's a lot of construction going on. I think that, as much as we've made an effort to communicate with them, I'd really like to maybe come out of this and redouble our efforts to be even more listening, and even more responsive to those kind of requests. I have a feeling, there were certain meetings that happened just before where there were people who were anti-development, who were starting to get a bigger following, and I'm not exactly sure why that might have been happening, but I'm a little concerned about it, and so I want people to go in there with things that are not insulting, things that are where they're definitely listening to what's going on in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I know you and I obviously have a project in Eagle Hill, and we've proposed a lot of projects with demolition single families. We've clearly heard from people in the neighborhood that they are not going to support demolishing of single family homes. So I've been passing on probably 5 or 6 single family homes that have come to me. They could have been projects, but they're not something that I'm going to do right now because of what the neighborhood wants to see.
Yeah.
We have a project that we're proposing in Eagle Hill, which is demolishing a rundown 3-family on a huge lot. I'm very interested to see how that is received when you have one side of the people saying, do not demolish single family homes. And now I'm saying, okay, well, I want to demolish a very rough shaped 3-family with 0 parking, and I want to put a beautiful 7-unit building with 7 parking. You would think, my hope would be that the response to that would say, Ricky, we told you not to demolish single families. Now you've shifted. Thank you. I don't know if we're going to get that type of reaction, but it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, it really is. Like, there's a lot of work that we get to do that is I like to believe is an investment in the community, is an opportunity to help kind of control housing costs, help to, hire a bunch of local contractors or hire people who are going on in the neighborhood. And there's a fear that anything that we do, whether it's replacing multifamily with different multifamily or even renovating existing buildings, that is not going to be well received. And we have to figure out a way, like a happy medium between reinvigorating some of these rundown properties and providing homes that in ways that that still address the people's mental image of their home, of their neighborhood.
Yeah. So let's let's kind of pivot and talk about the designs of buildings. I've been seeing a lot lately, and I know you and I feel like we've grown together over the years with like active communication over unit design and size versus efficiency versus sale price. And I think one thing that we really try to do, whether I work with you in any project, is kind of really try to make it clear to my architect, like the direct, and this is what more people I think need to do, is like it needs to be very transparent. It's like, this is what the unit can sell for. And we need to be looking at it from a perspective of like, whether the unit is 700 or 800 square feet, it's going to sell for this price, right? So efficiency is key, because that price to build the extra square footage there's a price there. So designing a building that's not efficient or even unfinanceable has continued to be like something that comes across my desk, where someone's gone through the process and they've ended up getting a project approved for something that's not even financeable because the cost to build doesn't make sense for the sellout. So how involved are you in that, and like kind of talk about unit layouts, square footages, and how that all shapes up?
Yeah, we were just having a conversation about that today, looking at a couple of units and really like trying to squeeze it. It's an existing building, so you're limited, but trying to squeeze the maximum efficiency out of the renovation project, and recognizing the fact that you can get in this case, you can get a good 2-bedroom out of it, or a bad 4-bedroom, and you have to like go back and forth with the client and kind of confirm with them that this is going to be specific to a smaller section of the market. And if you're comfortable with that, that person might actually pay a little bit more, but our experience has been that we've seen this unit sit on the market for a while. And if that's not going to be part of your strategy, you might want to be a little careful about it. That I think that's something we've seen a little bit. So I try and keep in contact with clients to find out, when we do units that are unique and are either more challenging or more special, try and get a feel for whether or not how the market responded to that, and how the market and how that plays out with what they're doing.
Yeah, so I think a perfect example of this, and this is something that's been huge for us, is the idea of a 1-bed versus a 2-bed, right? And like the sales price of a 1 versus a 2, a 600 square foot 1-bed or a 600 square foot 2-bed, or 650 square foot 1-bed versus 600 square foot 2-bed, the sales price can be $100,000 difference.
Yeah.
Right? $100,000. So if someone is pushing a project and they say, I think it works better as a 1-bed, that decision across a couple of units makes it profitable versus a loser.
Yeah.
And I think that people like sometimes don't take the time to dig into that decision when it's looking at it from that perspective. And I mean, we've seen it. We've seen a 650 square foot or 700 square foot 2-bed sell for 500 and something thousand. The same thing, if you just got rid of one wall, sells for $425, right? And so you're talking about $100,000 difference based on just the layout.
When one of my first clients that I ended up doing, we've probably done 40 projects together. At first, when he would try and when he would explain to me that a certain space was a 3-bedroom and the third bedroom was going to be, 85 square feet, I really pushed back on it. But he explained to me that, if you're going to do a space that's, 1,200 square feet or even 1,100, and you can get a third bedroom, even if it's a tiny bedroom, that bedroom is probably for a tiny person, And when you think about that, all of a sudden, the metrics that I had been using made a lot more sense, because that 3-bedroom offers a small family a flexibility that the best designed 2-bedroom just can't do,
Yeah.
So we've definitely seen that.
Yeah.
Neighborhoods.
And I think we've learned, you and I have some projects coming up where I think I can admit we made mistakes, right?
Yeah.
I look at the projects and we finish, and I'm like, if we just shifted this staircase like 4 feet, we would have a third bed that works.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, it's 4 feet off. It doesn't help the rest of the unit, and that 4 feet is probably the difference between hundreds of thousands of dollars on the project sellout, because it would have been on 3 units. Now we've got a third bed that actually functions. It wouldn't mess up the rest of the unit. And that could be $50K per unit, $150,000 on a 4-family, right?
Yeah.
It's 3 units that are affected. So, I think that can play a huge difference.
Yeah.
One thing that I've been doing on my larger stuff now, and I think this has been working well with you and with other architects, is actually giving a pro forma to them and saying, this is the rents, right? Mm-hmm. Maximize the amount that I make per month.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So I say, it's a big rental project. So I say, mm-hmm. I want the max amount per month to be generated based on what you think we can get approved. Mm-hmm. Right? So looking at it from that perspective, and what that does is it says to them, like, they start looking at like, well, if I can do a 2-bed, or I can do a studio and a 1-bed. I want a studio and a 1-bed, mm-hmm. because those will rent for $2,000 and $1,500, right? So that's $3,500. The 2-bed only rents for $2,800.
Yeah.
So it's a math game, and I think once you start showing that, and they start to design based on the pro forma, it starts to open their mind up to the idea that, like, well, a 2-bed is not worth as much as a 1-bed in a studio. Right. And so like it starts to work. Let's kind of talk about from a perspective of projects, and guys, send any questions that you guys have. We've got a few that have come in, but we'll get to a couple that we have. But let's talk about what someone should be expected from a efficiency ratio on a project. Like, it's something that everyone, misses out on, I think, when they're looking at a 3-family or a development. But what type of efficiency ratio should someone see from if they're doing a 3-family or if they're doing a development?
Sorry, ask that again. I was starting to get too dark in here.
Yeah, did the lights go out or something?
Well, when I came up here, the sunlight was just pouring in, and apparently the sun went down.
So on a 3-family, what type of efficiency ratio? So if the building's gross square footage versus sellable, right? And then understanding that on the development side, kind of walk someone through what that means, right? Gross versus sellable, and like how they should take that into account.
Yeah. So on a 3-family, these are like weird. For me, it was really weird when we started this, because the efficiency numbers can be incredibly high compared to a larger building. But basically, the sellable or rentable square footage is the net area of the unit, and that excludes the common areas. So if you've got a staircase and you've got some corridor space or some closets that are outside of the unit, they're unfortunately the common areas that aren't going to get you any rent. So we try really hard on a lot of the 3-families to limit all of the common area to either to the single staircase, or to push as much of that mechanical or other spaces that may not be getting you any rent into the basement or into areas that aren't going to provide any revenue. I think a lot of clients get maybe a little bit obsessed over the areas, and I am too. I can do what I can to try and make a building as efficient as physically possible. And then after a certain point, you have to recognize the fact that a well-designed 850 square foot might get you the same as a poorly designed 925 square foot or something like that. So while it's really important, and I am kind of a numbers junkie about it, it can also sometimes be an Achilles heel if we spend too much of our brain power focused on just the ratio of the numbers, and forget or don't take into account some of the other aspects that make sense. But ultimately, when we're doing this, we're often starting off with a spreadsheet, and the only way to put things in there is you can't necessarily put in a higher quality ratio. You have to put in the square footage numbers that you've got in front of you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see when you start to do quotes now. So we've built this whole pro forma Excel so we can quote a job based on the finishes and all the line items, right? Hundreds of line items. And we can take a set of plans, and Chris can go in and he can enter every line item in, and it can spit out what we'd actually kind of pay, right? Yeah. And it's very detailed, right? Every single breakdown of the line item. And it's crazy now because the typical way to price a project is gross square foot times price per foot. Right. And when you do it that way, that's the way that everyone prices, but in truth, that's not actually the way that the building is actually built. It's the safest way to look at a deal, price per foot of gross. It's the safest way. We use $250 a foot now. That's the safest way to look at a deal, in my opinion. $250 a foot, you can build it for $250 a foot. Maybe not in Fenway or Back Bay or somewhere in like a tight site with complicated soil, but it's a safe number to use. And when you start looking at these big buildings, right, we have Crescent, for example, 51 Crescent, huge building.
Yeah.
Right. I think the price to build it came in at like $4 million or like high $3 millions if you just took the gross times the square footage.
Right.
Then we put it into our pro forma, and it was closer to $3 million. Right. And that's because there's huge 4-beds. Right.
Yeah.
Those 4-beds they're 1,800 square feet, 2,000 square foot 4-beds. Those cost is not actually $250 per foot.
Right. Because you still only have one kitchen, and may have, even though those have 4 bathrooms, it isn't the same as having 4 kitchens for 4 1-beds.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So you take that unit and you make it 2,000 square feet, and you make it into 4 1-beds. Yeah. Of course, that's going to go through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, I think that, understanding the financials, but being safe is like is an interesting way to look at deals. But efficiency is key when you're just getting into these things.
Well, and early on in those projects, like I don't know the metrics on it, but I try and explain to clients just kind of how big a decision to have an elevator or not have an elevator can be, to have to go into a project thinking about certain things like open parking versus having all the parking enclosed could really be, even though on a gross square footage basis, those numbers don't show up at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think basements are crazy, right? Yeah. We don't do basements anymore.
Yeah.
I don't build basements.
And I have one client who's considers himself an expert on it, and we'll go down there and he'll say, we're not going to do anything with this basement. And I still take all the measurements and photographs because I know that he can probably get it done, but not many can. It's it's a battle you choose to love if you do.
So we look at basements now in these developments and we say, well, what's going into a basement? Unless it's living. If it's living,
yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
If you can do living down there.
If you can do living, it's one
storage
thing.
basement just doesn't make sense for most people.
We see so many projects now being built with storage in the basement. And we have some right now. We've got 2 going right now with basement storage. That basement cost me like $100,000, $100,000 or more to put a couple storage units for the units.
Yeah.
Right? There's no way those buyers are paying 4 units or not paying $25K more per unit for a tiny storage unit in the basement.
And what's more, I don't know how you do it, but when we were doing like bigger scale projects at SOM, we would come back, we would not give you a gross square footage number. We would give you a significant number of them. And I still do when a client asks me, I'm like, well, you've got X number of square feet of finished space. You've got X number of square feet of common space, and you've got X number of square feet of basement and or parking, because I want them to find a set of numbers that are different instead of taking one bat at the whole problem, but to try and like think through, yeah, that outdoor parking doesn't count as part of your square footage, but you should probably factor something into building it or factor something into like cleaning it and painting it and all of that.
No, for sure. I think having those different line items and pricing them different in a pro forma is key, because there is a number specific to it. So like right now we do the exact that. We say, what's my gross square footage, right? And then we ask, what's my garage? Don't, keep my garage out of that, right? Or keep my lobby out of that, so that I can then start breaking it out in more detail. Or basement. I need to know that there's a basement because it does come into play. Yeah. But it's not $250 a foot, right? So sure. It's like, like you said, breaking those out. So we got a question from Sean. He says, does the $250 per foot include the soft costs, or is that just construction costs? So I think that's something, it's just construction. I think that, people on these developments, they start to forget about all the soft costs that go into pre-con or pre-zoning all the way through to get a project to the market. So pay attention to that. I think that's where people at the end of a project are like, oh, I made like 50 grand. And that's because 100,000 of it went to soft costs that they missed. So there's so many times that an agent will send me a deal and I'll send it back to them. I'll say, well, what about this 150 grand that you didn't include, including your own fee? So, it's not a deal anymore. Here's so someone asked, for a duplex, would you rather have 4 rooms that are small or 3?
It depends on the neighborhood. It depends on the market. Are you going to be renting them? Are you going to be, is it like a family neighborhood? How big can the rooms be? I think that beyond 2 rooms, you can start to have some smaller bedrooms, but a lot of times when you get up into 1,000 or 1,200 or 1,400 square feet, you need to have at least one like bedroom for the person who is buying the condo. But it really depends on the neighborhood. It depends on the city or where it's being built, because what flies in Eastie does not fly in Brighton, that kind of thing.
Are you changing any of your designs based on COVID?
No. That's a really interesting question. Because we've been talking about it, we haven't come up with anything that we would do differently because of COVID, but we are seeing a lot more people, and I say partly we're not changing this because we've always pushed this, but we see a lot more people talking about roof decks, outdoor space, and natural light. We've always been pushing those as much as we could anyway, but we definitely feel like people bring it up more often. I think they are spending a lot of time at home thinking about, like, if I'm going to be here for any reason for a long period of time, I want to make sure my kids have somewhere to play. I want to make sure that I have a place to go out. We did do one proposal set of drawings for some buildings in East Boston that have like this beautiful little fourth level where people could sit out and enjoy year round, sit in a sunroom. And I don't know if that project if the client would have been as excited about that little amenity room if it weren't for COVID right now. So we haven't come up with anything that's like this, the world is going to change in this way, but we're trying to figure out like if there is something that's going to be different because of that.
So the one thing I actually have been thinking about, and I was talking to Jack today, EJO General Contracting, is we have a Bremen Street actually has a good spot for it, and I think we're going to start talking about it more. After meeting with Jack, and he came up with it, was built-in desks, right? And a work from home, not an office, because I don't have the square footage to put an office,
right?
But a spot that is a desk that can be used for a work from home area without taking up a couple hundred square feet of a small condo, right? And so the idea of like instead of an area, maybe an area that might have gotten a closet before, now that becomes a built-in desk area because more and more people are going to be working from home.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of like two closets, now one becomes a closet and then a second one becomes a built-in desk that can be used from a work from home space, maybe a mounted TV or a mounted monitor, and it's very small, but it could fit a chair and a desk. Because I think a lot of people are seeing now working from home. Even in my house, I have an office, right? And my wife is working on our kitchen table.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that we could start seeing from people. And I think it's something we should start trying to incorporate.
Absolutely. I think that would ultimately make a ton of sense to do something like that. Sorry, I'm running out of battery, so I've got to plug back in.
No, but this has been awesome. Let's kind of just we'll finish up. Is there anything that people should know about you or how to reach you if they want to hire you guys for a project?
Well, I think most people, they they know you, and they seem to reach out to you to get to me a lot of times. But in all honesty, like we're at the Context Workshop, Eric at the Context Workshop. You can email us. We're on Instagram. We have people reach out to us through that quite often. We we're pretty easy to find, I think. But anything that you can do to reach out would be great. We're excited.
Well, this has been awesome. Thanks for joining us tonight. Anybody who missed part of this or all of this, you just joined, we'll edit this and we'll get it up on our YouTube, and then I'll share the link so you guys can always watch this back. If we didn't answer your questions, you can send them to me, or you can send them to Eric at Context Workshop. And if you send them to me to find me, I'll forward them off to Eric or give you Eric's email. So, but this has been awesome. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks a lot, Ricky. I really appreciate this. This was fun.
All right. Talk soon, bud. Bye.
Yeah.